Welcome, curious minds, to The Deep Dive, where we meticulously unearth the essential nuggets of knowledge from a stack of sources. Today, we're plunging into a book so profoundly impactful, so undeniably scandalous that it quite literally reshaped centuries of political thought. And, it continues to echo in our popular culture even now.
That's absolutely right. We're dissecting Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince, which you could almost call the ultimate manual for navigating power. Our journey today is guided, primarily by the Penguin Classics translation by Tim Parks. And we're also looking at its remarkably insightful introduction and the translator's meticulous notes. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And this isn't just some relic from the past, is it? It's an astonishingly detailed blueprint for how power is truly gained and, maybe even more critically, how it's held. Often through methods that, let's be honest, directly challenge our modern sensibilities.
They really do. It forces you to confront some uncomfortable truths about how the world, or at least the political world, often operates.
So our mission on this deep dive is to really unpack Machiavelli's keen observations. We want to explore the tumultuous historical context that forged his often unflinching ideas and try to understand precisely why this slim volume became such a lightning rod for controversy.
Exactly. And yet it remains incredibly relevant, doesn't it? For anyone trying to navigate complex systems today, or maybe just striving to understand the raw mechanics of leadership, the sort of underlying forces.
Definitely. So get ready to discover some surprising facts, hopefully cut through some of the noise surrounding Machiavelli, and become truly well-informed on the intricate details of this pivotal work. Okay, so let's begin by setting the stage. Let's immerse ourselves in the world of the man himself, Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine mind behind this enduring and, often unsettling philosophy.
Right. He was born in Florence in 1469. And that year is actually quite significant.
Oh, why is that?
Well, it was the very same year that Lorenzo de' Medici, who we know as Il Magnifico, rose to power in Florence. So Machiavelli's life starts right alongside the ascent of this major political figure.
Ah, okay. So that detail, his birth year, coinciding with Lorenzo de' Medici's rise, it's not just biographical trivia.
Not at all. It immediately roots Machiavelli's entire existence in the very political complexities he would later dissect with such precision. Niccolò was the first son to his father, Bernardo. Bernardo was an ex-lawyer, had good contacts apparently, but no real wealth or influence to speak of.
So no silver spoon then?
Definitely not. It meant that if young Niccolò wanted to rise in the world, and his later career certainly shows he did, he'd have to rely entirely on his own intellect, his own strategic thinking. Interestingly, his younger brother, Cotto, chose a much safer, more traditional path. He went into the priesthood.
That contrast itself is telling, isn't it, within the same family?
It really highlights the different ambitions, the different ways of navigating that world.
And what about his early influences? The source mentions his parents.
Yes, his mother was apparently quite devout, a writer of religious poems. So that might be where some of his, remarkable writing skill came from. But then, in stark contrast, you have his father, Bernardo.
The skeptical one.
Exactly. Far more skeptical about religious dogma. He openly preferred the sober, almost empirical works of Latin antiquity, the Roman historians, over the Bible.
And this is key, right? Because Niccolò sided with his father on this.
He did, and that's a critical detail, I think, for understanding his entire worldview. Niccolò ultimately aligned himself with his father's religious skepticism. He gravitated towards those Roman historians. This early preference, it really sets the stage for his later, profoundly pragmatic and historically grounded approach to statecraft. He wasn't looking at morality or theology in the conventional sense.
He was looking at what actually worked in the past, what the detailed historical record showed.
Precisely. What worked, what failed, and why. Not what was prescribed by religious texts or abstract philosophy.
So, to really get Machiavelli and the prince, you have to understand the world he lived in, this volatile Italian landscape.
Absolutely. It's essential. To grasp both the intricacies of his own diplomatic career and also the vast tapestry of historical references he weaves throughout The Prince, you need a picture of Italy in the late 15th, early 16th centuries. It was incredibly fragmented, incredibly volatile.
A complex chessboard, the source calls it?
That's a good way to put it. A complex chessboard of constantly shifting alliances between major regional powers, think Florence, Venice, Milan, Rome. And then interspersed among them, you had a score of smaller, highly vulnerable states. Some were barely more than a city and its immediate surroundings.
And Florence itself was always trying to expand.
Constantly, trying to capture places like Arezzo, Pisa, Cortona, pouring immense resources into failed attempts on Lucca. Meanwhile, you had Rome, under various popes, always aiming to expand its temporal power north and east into Romagna and Emilia. Everyone was constantly jostling for position, for advantage.
It sounds exhausting and dangerous. How did they maintain any kind of stability?
Well, for over a century, somehow, they had managed this delicate balance of power. If one major player, say Venice or Milan, tried to grab Florence, the other two would usually step in, just to prevent any single entity from becoming too dominant.
A system of mutual deterrence, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But this fragile equilibrium, this whole system, it utterly crumbled with the French invasion of 1494. That event changed everything.
And Machiavelli himself had some strong opinions on why that invasion happened, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. With his characteristic bluntness, right there in The Prince, he explicitly says this disaster was largely the Italians' own fault. He meticulously details how, for some time, these major Italian states have been playing a really dangerous game.
Brinkmanship.
Yes. Constantly threatening each other with foreign intervention. Florence invited the French king against Rome and Naples back in 1480. Venice apparently encouraged the Turks to attack its own maritime possessions in 1482 during a spat with Ferrara. Pope Innocent VIII reminded the Duke of Lorraine about his claim to Naples in 1483.
So they were all bluffing, essentially, using foreign powers as threats.
Initially, yes, just trying to gain leverage. But in 1494, King Charles VIII of France, who had been invited by Milan to pursue his own claim to the throne of Naples, well, he called that bluff, dramatically. He brought a massive professional army into Italy, something no Italian state could realistically contend with on its own.
And Charles didn't just, make a brief appearance. This was a major event.
Huge. He marched south with an army far larger, far more technologically advanced than anything the Italians had seen in living memory. And this single event, this massive invasion, it didn't just end a battle. It kicked off a continuous period of foreign intervention and dominance in Italy.
A period that lasted for centuries, didn't it? Until the Risorgimento in 1870.
That's right. The French struggled to hold Naples, so they invited the Spanish from Sicily to split the kingdom. Then the Spanish, especially after Charles I of Spain inherited the Holy Roman Empire, eventually pushed France back north of the Alps. They even sacked Rome and ended up dominating Italy for something like 150 years.
Yeah. It's a chilling example, really, how those deep internal divisions just paved the way for foreign subjugation. That detail, the internal weakness leading to external vulnerability, seems absolutely central to Machiavelli's whole analysis.
It is. It's a recurring theme. And in the wake of this intense external pressure, Florence itself went through this dramatic internal upheaval. From 1494 to 1498, the city was basically under the rule of Girolamo Savonarola.
The fiery preacher.
The very one, a charismatic Dominican preacher from the influential monastery of San Marco. And Florence, which had been this hub of Renaissance humanism, classical learning, human potential, it was radically transformed into what the source calls a book-burning fundamentalist theocracy.
That's quite a shift.
A massive shift. Savonarola's brand of Christianity was starkly different from the, often corrupt and pleasure-loving papacy of the time. He preached a return to the Bible as the sole authority, relentlessly prophesied doom for sinful Florentines, a prophecy that for many seemed to come true with that French invasion.
So if the invasion seemed to confirm his prophecies, how did this whole book-burning theocracy actually end? It couldn't last, surely.
No, it couldn't. The church in Rome eventually realized that Savonarola's claiming to be God's prophet, directly challenging the Pope's authority, were a far greater threat to its power than any humanism or skepticism. So Rome exerted immense pressure to bring him down.
And the Florentines themselves turned on him.
By 1498, yes. He'd lost a lot of popular support within Florence itself. He was convicted of heresy, and in a pretty grim twist of irony, considering his own bonfires of the vanities, he was burned at the stake right there in the city's main square.
Wow. And it was shortly after all this drama, these deeply unsettling events, that Machiavelli himself steps onto the stage, politically speaking.
Exactly. He seized his opportunity. He successfully campaigned for and got elected to some incredibly important positions. Secretary of the Second Chancery that handled internal administration and foreign correspondence, and soon after, Secretary of the Ten of War, which dealt directly with foreign relations and military planning.
So right into the thick of it.
Absolutely. Positioned him perfectly to observe the tumultuous politics he would later analyze with such dispassionate, almost surgical precision. You can bet every detail of this period, this chaos, informed his future work.
So that's the man, forged in this crucible. Now let's turn to the book itself, The Prince. The story behind its creation, its genesis and intent is just fascinating. It was written, maybe surprisingly, after Machiavelli lost his job, his diplomatic post.
Yes, after his dismissal, followed by imprisonment and almost certainly torture. This is probably around 1513. The source gives this really poignant detail from a letter he wrote to a friend.
The one about his study.
That's the one. Describing how he retreated to his study, and he would literally put on his formal palace gowns, his courtly attire, to commune with the ancients, with the great minds of history. He said he found solace there, forgetting his worries, his fear of poverty, even his fear of death, in this intense intellectual conversation across time.
That's such a vivid image, isn't it? And a very humanizing detail. It really emphasizes the escape the book offered him during a time of, well, deep personal pain and political exile.
It really does. And the original title, another detail that's often overlooked but is crucial to understanding his intent, wasn't The Prince. It was On Principalities.
Ah, okay, more descriptive.
Much more. Its core aim was very clear: to categorize different kinds of states and, more importantly, to establish universal principles relative to the business of taking and holding power in each specific context. It was meant as a practical guide, meticulously rooted in historical observation, empirical reality, not abstract theory.
And yet, this practical guide, this detailed blueprint, became this massive scandal. So why? Why was it so scandalous? The source suggests it wasn't necessarily intentional provocation.
That's a key point. The scandalous nature was largely determined by its structure rather than any conscious desire to shock. It stemmed from Machiavelli's determined intellectual honesty, his unwavering commitment to reporting reality as he saw it. That forced him to explain that power often requires acting, well, outside the moral codes that applied to ordinary individuals.
Meaning leaders play by different rules.
Essentially, yes. He observed that once a victory was achieved, public opinion being what it was, nobody was going to put the winner on trial. This effectively placed political leaders in certain situations above ordinary law. He wasn't necessarily endorsing this, but observing it as a political reality.
So he wasn't advocating evil, just describing what is versus what ought to be.
Precisely. He took it as a given that life, particularly political life, is routinely and sometimes unspeakably cruel, and that rulers might genuinely face situations where they have no choice but to kill or be killed. His project wasn't to lament this brutal reality, but to clinically analyze it, to extract lessons.
And that's where the language becomes so jarring. The of necessity, must, have to.
Exactly. That ominous language permeates the text. Words like of necessity, must, and have to appear constantly. It makes the book scandalous not just in its general statements, the famous ones like the end justifies the means, or that men must be pampered or crushed, or even the chilling idea that the only sure way of keeping a conquered territory is to devastate it utterly.
Which are shocking enough on their own.
Right. But it's also the specific historical examples of barbarous behavior that Machiavelli presents without any moralistic hand-wringing. The cold, hard detail of how power operates in reality is what truly shocks.
He really does lay it all out, doesn't he? Cold and unblinking. Can you give us a couple of those particularly ruthless examples he uses where he just presents the facts without judgment?
Certainly. One really striking example involves the Venetians. They observed their mercenary leader, Carmagnola, fighting with, let's say, less than full enthusiasm. They got worried he might just walk off with territory he'd previously conquered for them if they tried to dismiss him. So they concluded that, at which point the only safe thing to do was to kill him.
Just like that, a purely strategic decision.
Presented as such. Another one is Hiero of Syracuse. When he took command of his country's army, he found they were all mercenaries. He realized he couldn't effectively use them, but he also couldn't safely dismiss them. So what did he do? He had them all cut to pieces.
Wow.
Again, these acts are presented not with moral outrage, but as logical, albeit brutal, necessities for a ruler needing to secure his position. It's about efficacy, not ethics.
And this brings us to that deeper level of the scandal highlighted in the translator's notes. It's not just that Machiavelli doesn't censure someone like Cesare Borgia for his immoral acts.
Right. It's his profound, almost clinical disinterest in the moral dimension, at least from a conventional Christian viewpoint. For Machiavelli, these are purely matters of shrewd or mistaken choices, not of good or evil. When he holds up Borgia as a model, morality just doesn't seem to enter the calculation.
It's solely about whether the man knew how to effectively win and hold power, how to build a strong state.
Exactly. Did his actions achieve the desired political outcome? That's the question. This purely positivist attitude, where thought and analysis serve decisive action rather than abstract moral concepts, that really lies at the heart of The Prince.
Yeah.
It's a very particular and, unsettling focus on the functional details of power.
So translating this, getting that raw essence across in contemporary English must have been a challenge. The translator, Tim Parks, aimed to avoid archaisms and corrosive quaintness, right?
Yes, his stated goal was to get to the essential meaning and deliver it straight. This meticulous focus on clarity and directness in the translation itself is crucial for conveying Machiavelli's often brutal, unvarnished insights. It's about capturing the detailed impact of his prose.
And one key example of that meticulous attention to detail in the translation is the choice to use ruler or leader instead of the traditional prince for the Italian word principe. Why was that so important?
It's actually a really important distinction, because Machiavelli's term principe doesn't literally mean the son of a king or, some kind of attractive young suitor, which are common modern English connotations we have with the word prince.
Okay, so what does it mean?
It refers generically to men of power, men who rule a state. The principe is the first or principal man, the person at the top. So by using ruler or leader, Parks immediately clarifies that Machiavelli's advice applies to anyone who holds supreme political authority, regardless of their title or lineage.
Ah, so it broadens the scope immediately, avoids a misleading association.
Precisely. It focuses on the function of power, not just a specific hereditary title.
That makes sense. And the translation also had to deal with Machiavelli's actual writing style. The source mentions erratic grammar and lots of subordinate and pre-modifying clauses. Sounds complex.
It can be quite dense in the original Italian, yes. Especially for a modern reader accustomed to more direct syntax. Parks had to navigate Machiavelli's sometimes convoluted sentence structures to make the underlying logic clear in English.
And the source highlights that Machiavelli is chiefly interested in psychology, or rather in the interaction of different personalities in crisis situations. That seems very adaptable to modern English despite the grammatical challenges.
Absolutely. His focus on the human element, on how leaders react under pressure, on the dynamics between rulers and ruled, makes his insights incredibly timeless. The challenge for the translator is to render that psychological acuity in language that feels immediate and relevant today, without sacrificing the historical context or Machiavelli's unique voice.
Can you give us an example of how Parks modernized the syntax? The source mentions comparing different translations of a specific paragraph.
Yes, let's take the paragraph about a ruler needing to declare himself as a friend or an enemy. W.K. Marriott's 1908 translation is quite dense, very much of its time. Lots of long clauses strung together.
Okay.
Then you have George Bull's 1961 version, which is smoother, definitely an improvement, but still retains a more formal, slightly academic feel.
Right. So how does Parks handle it? The source praises his contemporary, direct tone.
Parks meticulously reorganizes the information. He breaks down those long, complex clauses into shorter, more digestible sentences. He brings the core argument to the forefront much more quickly. Let me read a bit of his version about neutrality. A ruler will also be respected when he is a genuine friend and a genuine enemy. That is, when he declares himself unambiguously for one side and against the other. This policy will always bring better results than neutrality. It continues. For example, if you have two powerful neighbors who go to war, you may or may not have reason to fear the winner afterwards. Either way, it will always be better to take sides and fight hard. If you do have cause to fear but stay neutral, you'll still be gobbled up by the winner to the amusement and satisfaction of the loser. You'll have no excuses, no defense, and nowhere to hide.
You can really hear the difference. It's much more direct, punchier. It brings Machiavelli's argument to life for a modern ear.
Exactly. It streamlines the structure without losing the essential meaning, making his often stark logic far more accessible.
Okay, and now for a really striking detail, one that apparently reveals a lot about Machiavelli's own character and maybe his intended audience. The very last paragraph of The Prince itself. The translator's note talks about this raw, even explicit sexual reference.
Ah, yes, the fortune is female passage. It's quite something. Parks discusses how previous translators, perhaps due to Victorian bashfulness, softened the language considerably. Marriott used beat and ill-user. Bull used beat and coercer.
But Parks went for a more direct translation.
He did. He translates the key phrase as, fortune is female, and if you want to stay on top of her, you have to slap and thrust. The original Italian, batterla e rotarla, literally translates to something like beat her and shove her, or strike her and jostle her. It's aggressive language.
So what does this specific unvarnished detail tell us?
Well, Machiavelli was known, apparently, as a notorious womanizer. And Park suggests he clearly believed he was writing for an audience of men who weren't overly concerned with, well, what we'd now call political correctness or sensitivity. His direct, explicit phrasing reveals a certain frankness and almost raw masculinity in his writing that earlier versions deliberately downplayed.
So Parks's translation, using slap and thrust, brings back that original uncompromising voice.
That's the argument. It gives us a clearer, perhaps more uncomfortable glimpse into Machiavelli's character and the candid, even aggressive nature of the advice he felt comfortable giving. It underscores that he wasn't just talking about abstract power. He saw it as a kind of brutal, almost physical act of mastery, demanding a certain aggressive engagement with unpredictable forces. It's a truly arresting detail.
It really is. And that leads us perfectly into the dedication of the book and its highly controversial reception. Machiavelli initially intended to dedicate it to Giuliano de' Medici, didn't he? But then switched.
Yes, that detail of the shifting dedication is interesting. It shows his pragmatism even in choosing a patron. Giuliano apparently moved away from active politics, so Machiavelli pivoted to Lorenzo de' Medici, the nephew, more aggressive, more warlike, son of Catherine de' Medici. Lorenzo was the one the prince was ultimately dedicated to.
But the irony is Lorenzo probably never even read it.
That's the assessment, yes. Probably never opened it, and certainly didn't take time to study it. And, maybe Machiavelli himself should have realized the book's brutal honesty would be self-defeating if his goal was getting back into diplomatic favor.
Right. What ruler wants to hire the guy who literally wrote the book on trickery and pretending to be religious?
Exactly. It's a bit like revealing all your magic tricks. The goals of philosophical honesty and career advancement were probably never really compatible for the prince. Its very detailed frankness was its own obstacle in that sense.
A brutal reality check for him, perhaps? And his ideas, or at least the popular perception of them, just exploded across Europe, didn't they? Contributing to that infamous image of the murderous Machiavel.
They spread like wildfire. And Catherine de' Medici, Lorenzo's daughter, who became so influential in the French court, played a role, inadvertently or not. She brought Italian favorites with her, tried to manage the religious conflicts between Protestants and Catholics, but ultimately became widely blamed for the horrific St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572.
Where thousands of Huguenots were killed. That must have cemented Machiavelli's dark reputation.
It heavily contributed, whether fairly linked or not. One Protestant who escaped the massacre, Innocent Gentilet, fled to Geneva and wrote his hugely influential Discours contre Machiavel. And that work really set the tone for anti-Machiavellian criticism for decades.
Attacked from both sides, Protestant and Catholic.
Yes, both feared his approach of subordinating religious truth to political convenience. They saw it as potentially leading to a secular state where political power was completely untethered from divine law or moral authority. This detailed separation of power from piety was deeply unsettling in that highly religious era.
And this Machiavellian villain didn't just stay in political pamphlets. He became a star of the stage. The murderous Machiavel was a stock character in Elizabethan and Jacobean drama.
Oh, absolutely ubiquitous. Essentially synonymous with the idea of villainy for centuries. It's a fascinating theatrical lineage. The Roman author Seneca had already established a type of calculating amoral tyrant. Then Renaissance Italian theater updated this, adding Machiavellian elements, the unscrupulous courtier reveling in wicked calculation and cruelty.
And the English playwrights ran with it.
They certainly did, developing endless versions of the devious rogue, panders, misers, revengeful cuckolds, always ready to administer poisons with aplomb, never without a dagger hidden somewhere. Think Marlowe's Jew of Malta, Webster's Flaminio, Shakespeare's Iago, or Richard III.
So how did audiences react? Was it just pure horror and repulsion?
Not entirely, and this is a really interesting psychological detail. The source points out that beyond the superficial repulsion, there was often this powerful undercurrent of excitement.
Excitement at these villains.
Yes, stemming from the thrilling, almost forbidden thought that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to take life entirely into one's hands, to manipulate people and circumstances at will, pursuing selfish goals, without a thought for moral codes or eternal damnation. It's a very telling detail about our collective fascination with absolute unburdening power, isn't it?
It really is, a sort of vicarious thrill.
Exactly. And as time went on, this terrifying figure eventually kind of relaxed into comedy. Ben Jonson made fun of the type, and then much later you get the hilarious resurrection you mentioned. Rowan Atkinson's Blackadder adding cowardice to the list of Machiavel's vices, making him more amusing than truly threatening.
So ironically, the scandalous reputation actually helped keep The Prince in print. But there's a deeper reason for its enduring relevance, isn't there? Tied to the decline of medieval thought.
Absolutely. As medieval justifications for power began to wane, and as science and reason made their slow advances, a new urgent question arose for rulers. How can I convince people that I have a legitimate, reasonable right to hold power and to govern? Divine right wasn't cutting it anymore for everyone.
And the prince offered a stark, secular answer.
A stark, unflinching one. It acted as a constant threat to all the pomp and pious circumstance, the elaborate rituals designed to justify power. It was a brutal reminder that power is always up for grabs, always a question of what can be taken by force or treachery. And despite all protests, power is always the prime concern of any ruler.
It cut through the self-serving narratives.
Precisely. It laid bare the mechanics beneath the fancy clothes, the grand statues, the solemn charades that rulers used to dazzle people into believing they had some inherent right to rule. Machiavelli just showed the detailed workings underneath.
But the source also mentions a crucial nuance, one often missed by those who just see Machiavelli as purely ruthless. He did recognize the importance of the people, didn't he?
Yes, and this is a vital, often overlooked detail. While authorities often focus on his admiration for the ruthless Caesar Borgia to discredit him, they frequently ignored his perception that in the long run, a ruler must avoid being hated by his people and must always put their interests before those of the aristocracy.
Why? Because the people ultimately hold the power.
Because power ultimately lies with them, as he saw it. Simply because there are so many. This adds real complexity to his supposed ruthlessness. His realism wasn't just about applying force, it was also about understanding the sustainability of power. He knew that even the most brutal ruler couldn't last indefinitely without managing the populace, because their collective weight could eventually bring anyone down. It's a crucial detail often lost in the caricature.
Which is why maybe Machiavelli never seems to provoke indifference. You can't just dismiss him.
Exactly. Reading The Prince forces you to grapple with that deeply disturbing idea that politics cannot be governed by the ethical codes that most of us seek to observe in our ordinary lives. It's a book that, once you've read it, makes it very hard to go on thinking of our own leaders in quite the same way. The detailed, unvarnished analysis forces a reevaluation. #2, the taxonomy of states and their acquisition.
Okay, now that we've really set the stage, the man, the book, the scandal, let's dive into the core of his practical advice, his taxonomy of states and how they're acquired and maintained. Chapter 1 kicks off with a really fundamental distinction, doesn't it?
It does. It underpins his entire analysis of political power. He states, very simply, that all states, all governments that have ever ruled over men have been either republics or monarchies.
A simple binary to start.
A foundational one. And then he immediately starts breaking down monarchies into subtypes. Meticulously, they can be hereditary, where the ruler's family has governed for generations, or they can be new.
And new can mean different things, too.
Right? Entirely new, like when Francesco Sforza took Milan through his own skill and force. Or they could be territories a ruler has added to his existing hereditary state by conquest, like the King of Spain taking Naples piece by piece.
He's categorizing everything and how they're won.
He details the modes of conquest, too. A new territory might be won by the new ruler's own army, or by that of third party, or simply by luck, or deservedly, through merit and ability. This precise categorization, right from the start, establishes that pragmatic, almost scientific framework he uses. He's dissecting power, looking at the specific details, not just describing it broadly.
It's all about method, isn't it? So once you've got a state, how do you hold on to it? He dedicates a lot of attention to governing and holding different types of monarchies, starting with the seemingly easiest, hereditary monarchies in Chapter 2.
Yeah, he argues these are far easier to hold than new ones. His reasoning is pretty straightforward, based on the power of tradition, of habit. A monarch in that situation just needs to avoid upsetting the order established by his predecessors. And maybe, trim policies to circumstances when there is trouble.
Just don't rock the boat too much.
Basically, assuming the ruler is of average ability, he'll probably keep his kingdom for life. The underlying detail here is stability through inertia. Even if someone takes it by extraordinary and overwhelming force, that conquest is likely temporary. The traditional ruler will probably win it back as soon as the occupying power runs into trouble, because the people's loyalty remains with the old family.
Okay, that sounds relatively simple. But then Chapter 3, we hit mixed monarchies, combining old and new territories, and things get much harder.
Decidedly harder. Machiavelli points out the inevitable problem for any new regime trying this. Men are quick to change rulers when they imagine they can improve their lot. It's a deep-seated human tendency, this hope for something better. But then they often find that things have got worse.
Leading to disillusionment and instability.
Exactly. The new ruler, just by being new, is bound to upset the people in his new territories. First, just the presence of the occupying army is disruptive. Then come all the endless injustices consequent on any invasion. So right away, you've created enemies out of those you've harmed.
And you can't even count on the people who help you get in.
That's the paradox. You can't keep them happy either because you can't give them as much as they expected. But you also can't get tough with them because you still need their local support, however fragile it might be. You need insiders, however strong your armies. It's this intricate web of dissatisfaction, this detailed balancing act that makes holding these mixed territories so difficult.
He uses Louis XII and his failures in Milan as a case study for this instability. What are the specifics there?
Louis XII captured Milan so quickly and equally quickly lost it. Not just once, but twice. The first time, the people who had initially welcomed him, hoping for benefits, quickly saw their mistake. They realized they wouldn't be getting the benefits they'd hoped for and didn't want to submit to the harsh conditions imposed by the new king. So they rebelled.
And the second time, he presumably learned his lesson.
He tried. The second time, Louis had fewer scruples about punishing troublemakers, strengthening defenses, but he still lost Milan again. The source notes it would take the whole world to defeat his armies and drive them out of Italy, indicating the sheer depth of resistance. This detailed account just underscores how hard it is to hold on to territories with different customs, different loyalties that naturally resist being governed from outside.
So, given these huge difficulties, what are Machiavelli's actual detailed prescriptions? How do you hold these mixed states? He differentiates based on language and customs, right?
Yes, if the annexed territory shares similar language and customs, it's much simpler. A matter of careful management, really. The ruler has just two main priorities. First, eliminate the family of the previous ruler. Get rid of any figureheads for rebellion. Second, leave all laws and taxes as they were. Minimize disruption. Minimize resentment.
Keep things familiar.
Exactly. He points to places like Burgundy, Brittany, Gascony, Normandy under French rule as examples where this worked. This way, he says, the acquired territory and the king's original lands can quickly form a single entity. Almost seamless integration.
Okay, but what about the really tough scenario, where the new territory has different language, different customs, and different institutions? This is where his advice gets much more demanding and maybe more revealing.
This is where his insights really require close attention, yes.
Yeah.
He offers several key detailed strategies, all pointing towards a very hands-on approach. The absolute most effective solution, he says, is for the new ruler to go and live there himself.
Move in. Why is that so effective?
Several reasons, all practical details. It improves security and makes the territory more stable. He cites the Turkish Sultan in Greece. Other measures wouldn't have worked without the Sultan being physically present. Being on the ground lets you see when things start going wrong and nip rebellion in the bud instead of finding out when it's too late.
Plus, the people can appeal to you directly.
Right. It prevents your officials from plundering the place, and subjects can appeal directly to the ruler. This gives them one more reason to love you, and if they're not, all the more reason to fear you. It also acts as a strong deterrent against outside attacks. It's a principle of direct, visible control.
What about the military presence? How should that be managed in these culturally different places? Mercenaries are obviously out.
Definitely out. Machiavelli strongly argues for colonies versus occupying armies. He sees this as a critical choice. Colonies are useful, they're much cheaper, and provoke less widespread hostility. They only really antagonize the few people whose land is taken for the new settlements.
Whereas armies,
for long-term occupation, are pointless in his view. They're far more expensive. All the revenue from the new territory gets used up just defending it, turning a potential gain into a loss. Plus, an occupying army inevitably provokes more hostility because it damages the entire territory through billeting, requisitioning, general disruption. It creates enemies who can hit back because they're people beaten but still on their own ground. It's a very clear, practical, cost-benefit analysis focused on the detailed realities of long-term control.
he also gets into the weeds on how new rulers should handle neighboring powers. It sounds like a complex game of political chess.
It absolutely is. A ruler needs to make himself leader and protector of the weaker neighboring powers. Play the protector role. but at the same time, do what he can to undermine the stronger ones, the critical goal. Prevent any foreign power strong enough to compete with his own from penetrating the area. Keep powerful outsiders out.
How does that work in practice?
Machiavelli explains in granular detail that people who are discontented, whether out of fear or frustrated ambition, will always encourage a foreign power to intervene. He uses the Aetolians inviting the Romans into Greece as a classic example. He notes the Romans always moved into a new region because locals invited them. So the new ruler will find it easy to win support from weaker local powers who resent their stronger neighbors. But he has to be careful they don't get too powerful themselves. It's a constant, delicate balancing act, forming alliances, but also strategically weakening potential rivals.
And the Romans seem to be his gold standard for this kind of strategic thinking. He praises their foresight and action.
They absolutely are his model here. Machiavelli praises the Roman model with specific details. They consistently sent colonists, they built friendly relations with weaker neighbors like the Achaeans and Aetolians, but crucially without letting them increase their power. They actively undermined stronger neighbors like Macedonia, and they meticulously drove out Antiochus, preventing powerful outside rulers from gaining a foothold.
So it wasn't just reactive, but proactive.
It's exactly. Proactive foresight. Constantly managing the regional balance. Machiavelli stresses that wise rulers must, not restricting themselves to dealing with present threats, but using every means at their disposal to foresee and forestall future problems as well. He uses that vivid analogy with tuberculosis.
Ah, the one about diagnosis and cure.
Right. In its early stages, it's easy to cure and hard to diagnose, but if you don't spot it and treat it as time goes by, it gets easy to diagnose and hard to cure. Political problems are the same. You have to spot them early.
So the Romans acted decisively. They didn't put off war if they saw trouble brewing?
Precisely. They knew war couldn't be avoided in the long run, and that the odds would simply shift in favor of their enemies if they delayed. They consciously chose to fight Philip and Antiochus in Greece, specifically to avoid having to fight them later in Italy on their own soil.
A preemptive strategy.
Yes, and Machiavelli directly contrasts this with, "Our pundits today relax. Time is on your side." He scoffs at that, noting that time hurries everything on and can just as easily make things worse as better. It's a powerful argument for decisive early action, rooted in a deep reading of historical patterns and, frankly, human nature. The detail of Roman success, for him, lay in this long-term strategic thinking.
Okay, so with all these meticulous rules in mind, Louis XII's second loss of Milan becomes a perfect storm of Louis XII's mistakes, doesn't it? A detailed catalog of what not to do.
Absolutely. His errors were numerous and specific, a textbook example of miscalculation according to Machiavelli. First, Louis helped Pope Alexander to invade Romagna. Machiavelli says he failed to see that this decision weakened his own position, losing him friends, while reinforcing the Pope, adding temporal power to the Pope's existing spiritual authority. Big mistake.
And it got worse from there.
It did. Having made that initial mistake, he was dragged in deeper. To try and curb Pope Alexander's ambitions, Louis was forced to advance further into Italy himself, which lost him even more friends and alienated more local powers. Then, incredibly, he made an agreement to split Naples with the King of Spain.
Bringing in another major power.
Exactly. Introducing another equally great power into the peninsula, giving anyone unhappy with Louis someone else powerful to turn to. Machiavelli sums it up brutally. Louis kicked the man out and brought in a king who was powerful enough to kick him out. Every single step in Machiavelli's detailed analysis was a strategic blunder, a failure to grasp the long-term consequences.
Right. Now, Chapter 4 offers another key distinction, another layer of detail in state governance. This explains why conquests sometimes hold and sometimes fail, even for someone like Alexander the Great. It's about states governed in different ways.
Yes, this is a really important structural point for his analysis. He identifies two fundamental forms of monarchy, each with very different implications for conquering and holding on to power. First, there's the king and servants model. Think Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, as his example.
Okay, what defines that model?
In this system, the king, or sultan, is more powerful because he's the sole recognized superior. Everyone else is just a minister, appointed by him with no special loyalty beyond that appointment. Such a state is inherently hard to conquer.
Why?
Because there are no barons to invite you in. The subjects are hard to corrupt because they owe loyalty only to the sultan. Even if you bribe some officials, they can't bring any local support with them. But, and this is the crucial flip side, once you do conquer it and you eliminate the king and his entire family,
It becomes easy to hold.
very easy to hold, Machiavelli argues. because no one else commands the loyalty of the people. The old system of loyalty is effectively decapitated. There's no one left for the conquered people to rally around.
Okay, so that's model one. What's the second type of monarchy?
The second is the king and barons model. He uses contemporary France as the example here. In this system, the barons hold hereditary privilege. They have their own lands, their own loyal subjects, their own independent power bases.
So easier to conquer, harder to hold.
Exactly. It's easier to conquer because you can make inroads easily enough, winning the support of a baron or two who might be unhappy with the current king. There's always someone disgruntled who can give you a foothold, but it's very hard to hold.
Why is that?
Because it's not enough just to eliminate the king's family. There will always be barons ready to assume authority, ready to lead a rebellion. You can never fully satisfy or eliminate all of them. This perpetual existence of independent power centers creates constant opportunities for uprisings, making long-term control extremely precarious.
So how does Alexander the Great's conquest of Darius's kingdom fit into this detailed framework? His empire didn't immediately collapse after his death, did it?
No, and Machiavelli explains why. Darius's kingdom, he argues, was of the Turkish variety, that king and servant structure. This crucial structural detail is precisely why Alexander could hold it securely once Darius's army was beaten and Darius himself was eliminated.
So the successors didn't face rebellions from the conquered people?
Their main trouble came from their own personal ambitions and infighting, not from the conquered populace. The people simply had no pre-existing local lords, no alternative power structures to rally behind. This is in stark contrast, Machiavelli says, to states organized the French way. He points to the frequent uprisings against Roman power in Spain, Gaul, and Greece as proof. Those regions were internally divided into so many principalities with strong local loyalties.
And Rome only gained control once those loyalties were broken.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Only when the old loyalties to local lords were finally extinguished, often through brutal Roman policies, did Rome become the undisputed master. It demonstrates, in Machiavelli's view, that the internal structure of a conquered state is paramount. You need a detailed understanding of its underlying power dynamics to know if you can hold it long term.
Let's move to Chapter 5. This offers a ruler 3 basic options for governing previously self-governing city-states, places used to their freedom. What are the choices?
3 very distinct and often pretty brutal paths. Option 1, the most extreme. Reduce them to rubble, total destruction. Option 2, go and live there yourself, impose your presence directly, like we discussed with mixed monarchies. Option 3, let them go on living under their own laws, but make them pay you taxes and install a government of just a few local people who will keep the state loyal to you.
A puppet government, essentially.
Pretty much. That local government knows it owes its existence entirely to the invading ruler, so it has every incentive to defend his authority fiercely. However, Machiavelli emphasizes a really crucial point here, especially when dealing with former republics.
Okay, what's that? What's the only sure way for republics if you're a new ruler trying to establish stable control?
Machiavelli is brutally direct here. The only sure way to hold such places is to destroy them.
Destroy them entirely. Why so extreme?
He explains precisely why. A city that's used to governing itself, if you don't destroy it, will always rebel eventually. Rebelling, its people will always rally to the cry of freedom and the inspiration of their old institutions. He stresses that it doesn't matter how long they've been occupied or how benevolent the occupation, these things will never be forgotten.
He gives an example, right? Pisa.
Yes, the Pisans, who famously rebelled after 100 years of Florentine dominion, their memory of old freedoms lingers on and won't let them rest. So for republics, your only truly reliable options are total destruction, or moving there yourself to impose constant direct oversight. Anything less is asking for trouble.
But monarchies are different, less prone to rebellion.
In his view, yes. If a city or state is accustomed to being ruled by a monarch and you eliminate that ruling family, the people are slower to rebel. Why? Because they're used to obeying but now have no one to follow. They lack the ingrained habit and institutions of self-government that republics possess. This detailed distinction between republican and monarchical psychologies is critical to Machiavelli's brutal pragmatism. It's all about understanding the fundamental levers of power and loyalty in each specific case.
Okay, so we've meticulously classified states and gone through the detailed strategies for holding them once you've got them. Now, let's turn to the art of acquisition itself. Chapter 6 deals with states won by the ruler's own forces and abilities. Machiavelli states a very clear principle here, almost like a formula.
He does. He argues that the ease or difficulty of his staying in power will be in proportion to his abilities or failings. Basically, the less a ruler relies on pure luck, the longer and more securely his rule will last. This immediately sets up a core concept in The Prince. Real, durable power is built on self-reliance, on inherent capability, on virtue.
Which leads straight to the interplay of opportunity and talent. How does he see these two forces working together, like ingredients for success?
He sees luck or fortune as providing an initial opportunity. It's the raw material, the right circumstances, but it's talent, virtue, that molds this raw material into something lasting. He stresses that without this opportunity, their talent would have gone unused, and without their talent, the opportunity would have gone begging.
They need each other.
Exactly. Mutually dependent. Talent without opportunity is just wasted potential. Opportunity without talent leads nowhere. He gives some great examples of leaders who seized opportunities precisely because they had the ability.
Right, his exemplars of ability. Who does he point to? And what were their specific circumstances, those detailed opportunities?
He cites Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, and Theseus. For Moses, the opportunity was finding the Israelites enslaved in Egypt, desperate for a leader to guide them out. For Romulus, being abandoned at birth, then choosing to leave Alba Longa, that created the opening to found Rome from scratch.
And Cyrus and Theseus?
Cyrus found the Persians ready to rebel against the weak, undisciplined Medes, perfect conditions for a talented leader to take over. Theseus could only really demonstrate his greatness after the Athenians were defeated and dispersed, their society in chaos. That vacuum provided the space for a unifying figure to emerge. In every case, the difficult, chaotic circumstances were the raw material that their immense talent shaped into a new, stable state. The precise detail of the situation meeting the man is key.
So it sounds like these leaders, despite facing huge initial challenges, actually achieved more stable, lasting rule in the end. How does he explain that paradox, the initial difficulties lasting power idea?
He observes that they face all kinds of difficulties when setting up their states, but then hold on to them fairly easily. The main difficulty he identifies is the sheer challenge of introducing a new administrative system and new procedures. This inevitably alienates everyone who is doing well under the old system, creating instant enemies.
And the people who should support the new system are lukewarm.
Exactly. They offer only half-hearted support. Partly because they're afraid of the opponents who still have the old laws on their side, and partly because, as Machiavelli shrewdly notes, people are naturally skeptical. No one really believes in change until they've had solid experience of it. So when the old guard attacks, these new lukewarm supporters are weak and unreliable. This specific detail about human resistance to fundamental change, even beneficial change, is a classic Machiavellian insight.
And how vital is armed force in pushing through these new systems against resistance?
Absolutely indispensable. Machiavelli states flatly that these great founders couldn't have maintained new laws for long if they hadn't possessed armed force. He points directly to Savonarola in his own time as a cautionary tale. Savonarola's reforms collapsed precisely because he lacked the military force to back them up when opposition mounted. This just reinforces Machiavelli's core belief. Ultimately, all political power rests on the ability to enforce your will. A detailed, practical, maybe brutal observation.
You also mentioned Hiero of Syracuse as a lesser example, but still illustrating this principle of self-reliance. What was his story again?
Hiero started as an ordinary citizen. Machiavelli says his only luck lay in the initial situation. Syracuse was under threat from Carthage, so the people elected Hiero as their military commander. He was so successful they then made him king. A contemporary writer apparently said Hiero had all it takes to be a king except a kingdom.
So he used that initial opportunity, but then built his own power base.
Exactly. He systematically disbanded the old mercenary army, created a new citizen army, broke old alliances, forged new ones. He laid his own foundation. Machiavelli notes, quote, "So it cost him considerable effort to establish his power, but very little to hold on to it." He perfectly exemplifies using an initial lucky break, but then relying entirely on personal skill and hard work for two to build truly lasting power.
Okay, now for the flip side. Chapter 7. States won by lucky circumstance and others' armies. This sounds like a much shakier path to power, even if it looks easy at first.
Yeah, it's a definite paradox. Machiavelli observes that a private citizen who becomes a ruler out of sheer good luck needn't make much effort to take his state, but will have to sweat if he is to hold on to it. They get lifted into power by external forces, but then face any number of problems.
What's the main source of weakness?
Reliance on two extremely unreliable and unstable quantities. That's the support and the continuing success of whoever put them in power. Plus, these rulers often lack prior command experience. Crucially, they don't possess an army that can be relied on to stay friendly and loyal. So, like a plant that sprouts suddenly without deep roots, regimes that come out of nothing inevitably have shallow roots and will tend to crash in the first storm. The devil, as always for Machiavelli, is in the details of the foundation.
He contrasts Francesco Sforza, the self-made guy, with Cesare Borgia, who initially relied on luck to really hammer this point home. Tell us about them in detail.
Right. Francesco Sforza started as a commoner, became Duke of Milan through his own abilities and great courage. As Machiavelli puts it, he won power with enormous effort, held on to it easily enough. Cesare Borgia, Duke Valentino, on the other hand, received his territories thanks to his father's position. That was Pope Alexander VI. When his father died, he lost them.
Even though Borgia really tried to build his own foundation.
Exactly. Despite the fact that he used all means available and did everything a sensible, capable man could have done to lay the foundations for his own rule. Machiavelli suggests that if you don't meticulously lay those foundations before becoming king, it takes very special qualities to do it afterwards. And even then, it's tough for the architect and risky for the building. Borgia's story becomes this incredibly detailed case study in the limits of initial good fortune if you don't have that self-made foundation.
And Borgia, despite starting with luck and relying on others' armies, made some really calculated, ruthless efforts to solidify his power. What details does Machiavelli highlight about how Borgia dealt with his disloyal armies?
Borgia was incredibly shrewd, very adaptable. He started out using French help and the forces of the Orsini family to take territory in Romagna. But he quickly got suspicious of his own army, the Orsini forces, and also French policy. His doubts were confirmed when, after taking Faenza, he attacked Bologna and saw the soldiers anything but enthusiastic. The French king also stopped him from advancing into Tuscany.
So he realized he couldn't trust them.
Right. After that, Borgia decided never to rely on other people's armies and authority again. That was a crucial turning point for him, a detailed, pragmatic shift towards self-reliance.
Okay, so he decided to build his own power. How did he then impose order in Romagna? This is where we get into some of his most brutal yet effective actions, right?
Yes, this is a prime example of what the source calls Machiavelli's modern positivist attitude, focusing on the outcome, not the morality. Borgia found Romagna was a mess, run by weak, oppressive local lords, plagued by theft, feuds, and all kinds of injustice.
So chaos.
Total chaos.
Yeah.
To pacify and unite the area, he appointed this guy, Ramiro de Orco, described as a cruel, no-nonsense man, and gave him complete control. De Orco cracked down hard, pacified the region rapidly, and established a fearsome reputation through sheer ruthlessness.
But then Borgia turned on him.
And here's the truly shocking detail, the Machiavellian masterstroke, if you will. To avoid building resentment among the people against himself for de Orco's cruelty, Borgia decided that such draconian powers were no longer necessary. He then had Ramiro de Orco publicly cut in two in the piazza.
Wow, just executed his own enforcer.
Publicly and brutally. This is linked to the Senegalia incident where Borgia famously invited his rebellious mercenary captains to a parley and had them all murdered. After getting rid of de Orco, Borgia set up a civil court system. Machiavelli sees this cold, calculated act using extreme cruelty, then demonstratively punishing the instrument of that cruelty to win popular favor as lying at the heart of the prince. It's a strategic, detailed manipulation of public perception and fear.
So what were Borgia's grand plans, his sound foundations for this new empire he was building before his father died? What was the detailed blueprint?
He had four main goals. A meticulous plan for dominance. By the time his father, Pope Alexander VI, died unexpectedly, Borgia had actually achieved three of them. First, he killed all the local rulers he could get his hands on, eliminated rivals, consolidated power. Second, he'd won over the Roman nobility, secured his base in central Italy. Third, he had enormous influence over the electoral college, the cardinals who would choose the next pope, aiming to ensure a friendly successor.
And the fourth goal?
The fourth, which he was agonizingly close to achieving, was to extend his territory significantly and become master of all Tuscany. His failure to achieve that last crucial step before fortune turned against him was, in Machiavelli's view, the key vulnerability.
So if he was so talented, so meticulous in his planning, why did it all fall apart? Was it just pure bad luck in the end?
Machiavelli largely attributes Borgia's downfall to extraordinary bad luck. Both Borgia and his father fell seriously ill at the exact same critical time. Legend has it here. Alexander accidentally poisoned them both. But the key point is the timing. His father died, removing his primary power source, and Borgia himself was at death's door, completely incapacitated at the crucial moment, leaving him vulnerable.
He couldn't act.
Exactly. Machiavelli recounts that Borgia told him he had plans for every contingency. Regarding his father's death, he'd anticipated every political move. But, as Borgia apparently said, it never occurred to him that when the time came, he too might be at death's door. This specific tragic detail highlights fortune's unpredictable role. Even the most prepared, most calculating ruler can be undone by sheer unforeseen misfortune.
Yet, despite this ultimate failure due to bad luck, Machiavelli still presents Borgia as a kind of model for new rulers. What specific policies, what qualities did he admire and recommend, even knowing how it ended?
He's remarkably unequivocal about it. I can't find anything to criticize in Borgia's actions as a model for new rulers, given the circumstances he faced. He saw Borgia's strategies as perfectly executed attempts to build power from a weak foundation. He recommends Borgia's policies for anyone who must ward off enemies and woo friends, overcome obstacles by force or fraud, have himself loved and feared by his people, followed and respected by his soldiers.
It's a long list.
It is. Who must eliminate enemies likely or certain to attack him, reform old institutions, show himself both severe and gracious, generous and spontaneous, break up a disloyal army and build a new one, keep the friendship of kings and princes so that they support him with deference, or at least think twice before harming him. It's an incredibly comprehensive and, yes, amoral checklist of attributes for an effective ruler aiming to establish power. The detail is in the sheer breadth of skills required.
Machiavelli does identify one fatal error Borgia made despite all this brilliance, a single miscalculation that proved decisive.
Yes, his only real criticism. Borgia's fatal mistake was his role in the election of the next pope, Julius II, who was Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere. Borgia had seriously wronged this cardinal in the past, and Julius had every reason to fear Borgia if he, Julius, became pope.
So Borgia should have blocked his election.
Machiavelli argues Borgia should never have allowed a cardinal whose interests he had damaged, or who, as pope, would have reason to fear him, to win the election. He concludes grimly. Because it's fear or hatred that makes men attack each other. And anyone who thinks an important man will forget past grievances just because he's received some new promotion must think again. This oversight, this failure to account for deep-seated resentment, was, in Machiavelli's detailed analysis, fatal. It shows even brilliant strategists can be undone by a single, crucial misjudgment of human motivation, especially long-held grudges.
A stark lesson. Okay, let's move to Chapter 8. States won by crime. How does Machiavelli define this, and how does it differ from other methods, especially in terms of what it earns the ruler? Glory, for instance.
He defines it very specifically as power seized by some terrible crime. He uses Agathocles of Syracuse as a prime historical example. Now, what's crucial here is that while Machiavelli acknowledges Agathocles' sheer ability rising without backers or benefactors, surviving hardships, making tough, dangerous decisions, he draws a very clear line between talent versus glory.
So crime might get you power, but not respect.
Exactly. He states that killing fellow citizens, betraying friends, and living without loyalty, mercy, or creed are definitively not signs of talent, in the sense of earning lasting renown or gloria. While such actions might bring power, they bring but not glory. This is one of the few places where Machiavelli subtly introduces a judgment beyond pure effectiveness. He suggests that while the ruthless means might work, they don't elevate a leader in the eyes of history. The detail lies in that distinction between power and glory.
And this leads to that crucial, often misunderstood distinction he makes about cruelty, well used versus badly used. What's the precise detail here? This isn't just about being cruel, is it?
No, absolutely not. This is a cornerstone of his thought, showing his rigorous, almost clinical approach to the application of power, specifically cruelty. Cruelty well used, if we can ever speak well of something bad, and notice that qualification is short-lived, decisive, no more than is necessary to secure your position and then stop.
So quick and targeted.
Precisely. You don't go on being cruel. Instead, you use the power it has given you to deliver maximum benefits to your subjects. He suggests a leader who takes this surgical approach, like Agathocles after his initial bloodbath, actually has a chance of improving his position with his subjects and with God too.
And cruelty badly used.
That's when you're not drastic enough at the beginning but grow increasingly cruel later on rather than easing off. If you go that way, Machiavelli warns, you have no chance at all of holding on to power long term. It's about a single, necessary, decisive act of brutality to achieve stability versus indiscriminate escalating brutality that just alienates everyone and breeds constant fear and hatred. It's a calculated, you could even say efficient, use of a terrible tool judged purely on its political effectiveness. The detail is in the timing and intensity.
Okay, moving on to Chapter 9, States won with public support. Machiavelli sees two main paths here, support from the people or support from the nobles. Which does he prefer, and why does he break down the details of these paths?
He unequivocally favors gaining power with the advantage of people's support. A ruler who comes to power this way holds it alone and has no one or hardly anyone around him who's unwilling to obey. Plus, the people's aspirations are inherently more honorable, in his view.
More honorable? How so?
Because the nobles want to oppress the people, while the people want to be free from oppression. It's a simpler, more defensive goal. Crucially, from a practical standpoint, a king can never be safe if the common people are hostile to him, because there are so many of them. Whereas he can protect himself against the nobles, since there are not so many.
Numbers matter.
Immensely. And the threat is different. The worst the people can usually do is just desert him, withdraw support. But nobles can not only desert, they can also launch a direct attack. They have the resources and ambition. This highlights the sheer numerical power and more unified objective of the populace as a whole, a critical detail for anyone wanting lasting power.
So given that nobles are ambitious and potentially treacherous, how should a ruler manage nobles? What's his detailed advice for keeping them in check?
He categorizes them very practically into two groups: those who tie themselves entirely to your destiny and those who don't. The first group, the loyal ones, assuming they're not just greedy, should be honored and loved. Build those bonds.
And the ones who hold back.
The second group needs further division. Those who hold back because they're just anxious men, naturally lacking in character, well, you can still use them, especially for their good advice. They'll respect you when things are going well, and you don't need to fear them when things are tough. But, and this is the danger group, those who hold back out of calculation and ambition, those must be watched as if they were already declared enemies, because they will inevitably be working to bring you down the moment you show weakness. It's a very practical, maybe cynical, but deeply observed assessment of loyalty and motivation among the elite. Every detail of their behavior signals their intent.
What if a ruler does come to power with noble support, the less ideal route? Can he still win over the people afterwards? And how?
Yes, and he absolutely must. If a ruler gains power thanks to the nobles, Machiavelli insists he must make it an absolute priority to win over the affection of the common people. And he argues this is surprisingly easy if he takes them under his protection.
Protect them from the nobles, essentially.
Exactly. And Machiavelli notes a psychological detail. When people are treated well by someone they thought was hostile, they respond with even greater loyalty. They'll become even more devoted than if he had taken power with their support initially. This just underscores his belief that popular support, however you get it, is the most solid foundation for rule, a specific detail about cultivating loyalty that many might miss.
Finally, in this section, a warning about the risks of proxy rule. When a ruler tries to transition from publicly supported leadership to absolute rule, what's the hidden danger of ruling through intermediaries, through magistrates?
This is a subtle but critical pitfall. If a ruler governs indirectly, through magistrates or officials, he actually becomes weaker and exposed to greater risks. Why? Because these magistrates can very easily strip him of his power, particularly when times are hard. They can either attack him directly or simply refuse to carry out his orders.
And in a crisis, the ruler can't just take back control easily.
No, because in that moment of crisis, he won't have time to assert direct command. The citizens are used to taking orders from magistrates, and they aren't going to start obeying him in a moment of crisis. He'll suddenly find himself struggling to find anyone loyal who holds real authority on the ground.
So what's the detailed advice?
A sensible ruler must work out a situation where his citizens will always need both his government and him, however well or badly things are going. Then they will always be loyal. It's a vital point about maintaining direct personal control and ensuring the people depend on the ruler himself, not just on delegated administrative structures. That dependency is key.
Okay, we've covered the acquisition and the meticulous governance of states. Now, let's pivot to what Machiavelli considers the absolute cornerstone, the very foundation of any power, military might. Chapter 12 lays this out clearly. The importance of good laws and good armies.
Yes, he argues unambiguously that the main foundations of any state are good laws and good armed forces. But then he makes an even stronger, more revealing claim, which is, he says, you can't have good laws if you don't have good armed forces, while if you have good armed forces, good laws inevitably follow. This is a crucial detail for understanding his entire worldview. He prioritizes military strength above everything else. He sees good governance, order, stability as almost an inevitable consequence of having a well-ordered, loyal, effective fighting force. The army comes first.
And this leads him straight into a scathing indictment of the danger of mercenaries. What are their specific flaws, according to his detailed observations? Why are they so bad?
He calls mercenaries and auxiliaries simply useless and dangerous, a fatal weakness. He details their flaws with biting precision. They're ambitious, undisciplined, disloyal. They quarrel among themselves. They're courageous with friends and cowardly with enemies. They have no fear of God and keep no promises.
They only care about money.
Exactly. Their only motivation is a meager salary, which isn't enough to make them want to die for you. They're happy to be your soldiers while you're not at war, but when war comes, they run for it or just disappear. In peacetime, they plunder you, and in wartime, they let the enemy plunder you. It's an utterly dismissive, comprehensive condemnation based on observed behavior.
And he blames Italy's problems, Italy's ruin, squarely on this dependence on mercenaries. He gives a specific, almost humiliating example, doesn't he?
He does. He declares flatly that Italy's present ruin has been caused precisely by a prolonged dependence on mercenaries. He points to that specific, painful detail from the 1494 French invasion. When Charles, King of France, came down, his army didn't even have to fight. His men just put chalk crosses on the buildings they planned to use as billets.
Chalk crosses, that's it.
That's it. It vividly illustrates the sheer uselessness, the cowardice of the mercenary forces Italy relied on when faced with a determined, unified national army. Machiavelli even twists Savonarola's prophecy about Italy's ruin being due to its sins. He says the real sins were not what he was thinking of, but the ones I've been talking about, meaning the sin of relying on mercenaries. The precise nature of their downfall was military incompetence, not moral failing.
He also points out the flaws inherent in mercenary commanders themselves.
Yes, even if a mercenary commander is excellent, Machiavelli warns you can't trust him because he will always aspire to power himself. He'll either attack you, his paymaster, or attack others against your wishes. And if the commander is not capable, well, he'll ruin you anyway through sheer incompetence.
So damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Pretty much. For Machiavelli, the only correct model is that a ruler must go in person and act as commander himself. And a republic must send its own citizens, not hire outsiders. Experience, he insists, shows that only rulers and republics with their own armies make serious progress, while mercenaries bring nothing but trouble.
The sources list a whole load of historical examples of mercenary failure from different places. Carthage, Thebes, Milan. What's the consistent lesson from all these detailed cases?
The consistent lesson woven through all these examples is Machiavelli's unwavering belief. Relying on external, uninvested forces is a recipe for disaster. We see Carthage almost overthrown by its own mercenaries after the First Punic War. The Thebans stupidly made Philip of Macedonia their commander, and no sooner had he won the war than he stripped them of their freedom.
And Milan, with Sforza.
The Milanese hired Francesco Sforza to fight the Venetians. Sforza, a brilliant mercenary general, famously overthrew his paymasters, the Milanese, after beating Venice, and took Milan for himself. Even Florence had close calls. They were lucky, Machiavelli suggests, that one potential mercenary threat, Giovanni Acuco, Sir John Hawkwood, lost his war before he could turn on them.
What about Venice? They started strong, didn't they?
They did. Initially, the Venetians fought confidently and successfully at sea, where they used their own nobles and armed citizens. But when they expanded onto the mainland, they started hiring mercenaries, and quickly got a taste of the trouble. They eventually had to kill their own successful mercenary commander, Carmagnola, because they realized he'd lost his fighting spirit, and they couldn't fire him without losing territory he'd won for them.
And later they suffered a massive defeat.
A devastating one. Under other mercenary commanders like Bartolomeo da Bergamo and Niccolò Orsini at the Battle of Vaila, they lost in a single day all the gains they had so determinedly accumulated over the past 800 years. One battle, fueled by mercenary unreliability, wiped out centuries of effort. This single, detailed disaster underscores Machiavelli's point with brutal clarity. The pattern is undeniable. Short-term convenience leads to long-term vulnerability and often ruin.
He even gets into this specific mercenary tactics that led to this ruin. It wasn't just cowardice, but their whole way of fighting.
Exactly. Their tactics were entirely self-serving, designed to minimize their risk and maximize their profit, not to win decisively for the people paying them. They played down the importance of infantry, focusing on cavalry because cavalry numbers were smaller, easier to manage, easier to feed and pay. They did everything possible to avoid hard work and danger.
What did that look like in practice?
It meant they wouldn't kill each other in combat, but took prisoners, then didn't even ask for a ransom. They wouldn't attack fortifications at night. They wouldn't leave their own fortifications to attack a besieging army's camp. They didn't dig ditches or build stockades around their camps. And in winter, they didn't camp out at all. They just went home.
So a kind of gentlemanly, low-risk warfare that achieved nothing.
Precisely. Machiavelli concludes that all these omissions became accepted practice because they wanted to steer clear of danger and hard work. Thus, they brought Italy to slavery and humiliation. It's a damning indictment built on precise, detailed observations of their operational doctrine and their complete lack of genuine investment in the outcome.
Brutal. So if mercenaries are totally out, what about auxiliaries, combined forces, and citizen armies in Chapter 13? Auxiliaries are troops sent by an ally, right? He's equally dismissive of them.
He is. Auxiliaries, when a powerful ruler sends military help to defend your town, are likewise useless. Machiavelli states they are almost always counterproductive. Why? Because if they lose, you lose too. And if they win, you are at their mercy. Their very effectiveness, if they succeed for their goals, comes at the expense of your independence and safety. He provides the painful detail that their potential success is their most dangerous flaw for the ruler who invited them.
Even Pope Julius II had a close call with this. A lucky escape.
A very lucky one. Pope Julius, during his Ferrara campaign, initially used Spanish auxiliaries because his mercenaries were so bad. But when his Spanish allies were beaten at Ravenna, the Swiss mercenaries fighting for the French unexpectedly routed the hitherto victorious French. This fluke saved Julius from becoming a prisoner either to his French enemies or to his own Spanish auxiliaries. This detailed anecdote just highlights how relying on foreign forces is always a gamble where your fate isn't really in your own hands. His escape was pure luck, not strategy.
Cesare Borgia, though, seems to have learned this lesson quickly in his evolution as a leader. He moved away from external reliance.
He did. Borgia initially used French auxiliaries to take Imola and Forlì, but feeling they weren't reliable, sensing their loyalty lay elsewhere, he shrewdly switched to mercenaries, the Orsini and Vitelli forces. But then he found them to be unreliable too. They dithered in battle and were disloyal and dangerous. So what did he do?
Got rid of them.
He had them killed and trained his own men. Machiavelli notes that Borgia's prestige grew with each step towards self-sufficiency, and he was only truly respected when everyone could see that his troops were entirely his own. This detailed progression shows Borgia rapidly adapting to that crucial military lesson. Only self-sufficiency builds real, reliable power.
Hero of Syracuse, again, provides that concise example.
Yes, Hiero, like Borgia, quickly saw his mercenaries were no good. So he had them all cut to pieces and from then on fought only with his own soldiers. A brutal, decisive act that ensured his independence and solidified his rule. It echoes Machiavelli's consistent theme. Relying solely on your own arms, your own people, is the only secure path. The detail is in the decisive action he took based on that realization.
He even uses that biblical analogy, David and Goliath, to drive the point home.
It's a perfect analogy for self-reliance, isn't it? David refuses Saul's armor and weapons, preferring his own familiar sling and knife. Why? Because other people's arms are either too loose, too heavy, or too tight. It perfectly captures Machiavelli's principle. You're safest and most effective using your own homegrown strength, not relying on external forces that might not fit your needs or loyalties. It's about fighting with what is truly yours, what you understand intimately.
What about the French army development? That sounds like a detailed historical account showing the danger of relying on foreign troops, even just partially.
It is. Charles VII, Louis XI's father, wisely established a standing army of both cavalry and infantry after pushing the English out of France. A profoundly good move, Machiavelli says, securing the kingdom. But his son, Louis XI, made a critical mistake. He disbanded the French infantry and instead started hiring Swiss mercenaries.
Why was that so bad?
Because it weakened his whole army. His own French cavalry became dependent on the Swiss infantry. They started to think they couldn't win without them. The French army became this mixed force, part mercenary and part their own men. While better than pure mercenaries or auxiliaries, it was much worse than having all your own men. This detailed historical progression serves as a cautionary tale. Seemingly minor tactical decisions can have huge long-term strategic consequences. Machiavelli explicitly blames France's contemporary troubles on this very mistake.
And he throws in that chilling detail about Rome.
Yes, that the Roman Empire's collapse began precisely when they started hiring Goths as mercenaries, a final stark warning.
So, the inevitable conclusion from Machiavelli on military matters is crystal clear. Self-reliance isn't just preferable, it's necessary.
Absolutely. Machiavelli states it unequivocally. No state is secure without its own army. If it hasn't got men to defend it determinedly and loyally in a crisis, it is simply relying on luck. He quotes what he calls a timeless principle. There is nothing so weak and unstable as a reputation for power that is not backed up by its own army. And this own army must be composed of subjects or citizens or men dependent on you. Everyone else is unstable, unreliable, ultimately dangerous. That's the ultimate military lesson, a core detail of his philosophy. Self-reliance is the only true defense.
Now, Chapter 14 reinforces this by stating in really stark terms that a ruler's sole vocation must be war. That sounds incredibly single-minded.
It is. He asserts that a ruler must have no other aim or consideration, nor seek to develop any other vocation outside war, the organization of the army and military discipline. This, for Machiavelli, is the only proper vocation of the man in command. He argues it not only keeps those born to rule on their thrones, but often raises private citizens to political power.
And neglecting it leads to downfall.
Inevitably. When rulers prioritize frills than fighting, they lose their thrones. Neglecting the art of war is the thing most likely to bring about a ruler's downfall, while mastering it is the thing most likely to win him power. It's an incredibly precise, almost obsessive focus.
Francesco Sforza again provides that clear example.
Yes, Sforza rose from commoner to Duke of Milan, precisely because he was a military man dedicated to the art of war. His sons, however, by shunning military hardships, fell from dukes to commoners, losing the power their father had won. It directly illustrates Machiavelli's point. Constant military competence is essential, regardless of your starting point. He also adds a practical detail. A ruler without an army, or without military skill, will quickly be seen as pathetic, losing the respect and trust of his soldiers, leading to contempt and suspicion.
So it's not enough just to have an army or command it. The ruler himself must prepare physically and mentally for war, even in peacetime. What specific details does he recommend for physical preparation?
For physical prep, he recommends hunting a great deal, not just for fun, but to toughen up his body. More importantly, hunting helps him get to know different landscapes, how the mountains rise and the valleys open out, the lie of the plains, what rivers and marshes are like.
Knowing the terrain.
Exactly. This topographical knowledge, he insists, is crucial for defending his own country and for understanding foreign terrain when planning campaigns, choosing campsites, planning battles, laying sieges. A ruler who lacks this fundamental skill lacks the first thing a commander needs. It's a very practical, almost granular, detailed requirement. Map reading level stuff.
And for mental preparation, he suggests specific intellectual exercises, reading history, modeling great leaders.
Yes, mental prep is just as important. A ruler must read history, especially accounts of great leaders and their achievements, study their wartime strategies, analyze the reasons for their victories and defeats so as to avoid the failures and imitate the successes. Beyond just reading, he must actively take a praised leader as a model, keeping his example and achievements in mind at all times.
He gives examples of this modeling.
He does. Alexander the Great modeled himself on Achilles. Caesar modeled himself on Alexander. Scipio modeled himself on Cyrus, specifically, influenced by Xenophon's biography of Cyrus, which praised Cyrus's decency, charm, humanity, generosity. This isn't just abstract learning. It's a detailed, practical curriculum for developing military thinking by studying past masters.
And there's that really great, detailed example of Philopoemen, the Achaean leader, showing how to practice strategy constantly, even without a war on.
Philopoemen is the ultimate example of this mental dedication. Even in peacetime, he thought of nothing but military strategy. When he was out walking with friends, he'd constantly pose hypothetical battle scenarios based on the terrain around them. If the enemy were over there on that hill and we were down here with our army, who would be in the better position? How could we attack them without breaking ranks? If we decided to retreat, how would we do it? And if they retreated, how would we go after them?
Like a constant war game in his head.
Exactly. He'd list all the possible predicaments an army could face, listen to his friends' ideas, explain his own. Machiavelli says that, thanks to this constant work of mental preparation, when he was back leading his armies, there was simply nothing that could happen that he didn't know how to deal with. This unwavering, detailed commitment to ceaseless mental drill is Machiavelli's absolute ideal for a ruler's dedication to the art of war.
Okay, now let's delve into the real heart of Machiavelli's most controversial and often misunderstood advice, the character of the prince, how he navigates virtues, vices, reputation. Chapter 15 lays out his incredibly stark reality of leadership, explicitly moving beyond fantasies.
This is where he truly breaks from past political philosophers who often describe ideal rulers' utopian states. Machiavelli says his aim is to write something useful for anyone interested, and to get to the real truth of the matter, not to repeat other people's fantasies. He slams writers who have dreamed up republics and kingdoms that bear no resemblance to experience and never existed in reality.
Straight away, he's grounding it in empiricism, in observation.
Absolutely. He's looking at the world as it is, warts and all, not as maybe it should be. This foundational detail, this commitment to realism, shapes all the advice that follows.
And this leads directly to probably his most controversial point, the necessity of not being good. That sounds deliberately provocative.
It does, doesn't it? He identifies this gap between how people actually live and how they ought to live. And his chilling conclusion from observing this gap is that a ruler who declines to behave as people do, in order to behave as they should, is schooling himself for catastrophe and had better forget personal security.
So survival means adapting to how people actually behave.
That's his argument. Therefore, if a ruler wants to survive, wants to maintain power, he'll have to learn to stop being good, at least when the occasion demands. Now, this isn't a blanket call to be evil all the time. It's a pragmatic recognition that conventional morality, rigidly applied, could be a profound liability in the ruthless world of politics. It's about situational necessity, not inherent depravity. The detail is when the occasion demands.
Okay. Moving to chapter 16, he discusses generosity and meanness, or maybe frugality is a better word. This seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't a generous ruler be more popular?
You'd think so, but Machiavelli argues the opposite. He identifies the pitfall of visible generosity. He says, being generous just to be seen to be so will damage you. Why? Because that kind of performative generosity exhausts wealth. It forces the ruler to impose special taxes and do everything a ruler can to raise cash.
Which makes people hate him.
Exactly. His people start to hate him, and no one will respect him now he has no money. Since this visible generosity harms the majority and benefits only a few, the ruler becomes vulnerable, easily toppled by the first bad news. And if he then tries to reverse course and become frugal, he just gets accused of meanness. It's a detailed lose-lose scenario in his view.
So being mean, being frugal, is actually a political virtue for Machiavelli.
In a practical sense, yes. He implies that true generosity, practiced out of real goodwill, often risks passing unnoticed and bringing no practical benefit politically. Whereas a reputation for meanness frugality is actually better for long-term stability. It enables a ruler to defend himself without burdening his people, and allows him to fund necessary projects without causing resentment.
He makes a distinction about spending other people's money, though, right?
Yes, a key detail. When a ruler is living on plunder, pillage, and extortion from conquests, being generous with other people's money is totally fine. In fact, it raises his standing with his own soldiers and people. He cites Cyrus, Caesar, Alexander as examples of leaders who were lavish with the spoils of war. This is a cold, detailed calculation. Be frugal with your own resources, generous with resources acquired elsewhere. It's all about managing resources and public perception.
Okay, this brings us to maybe the most famous and most argued over question from the prince. Chapter 17, Cruelty and Compassion, Feared or Loved. What's the central question he poses, and what's his direct, pragmatic answer?
The question is blunt. Is it better to be loved rather than feared, or vice versa? And Machiavelli's big occult famous answer is, one would prefer to be both, but since they don't go together easily, if you have to choose, it's much safer to be feared than loved.
Safer. Not necessarily better, but safer. Why? What's his reasoning, rooted in his view of human nature?
His reasoning is pretty cynical, based on his detailed observation of how people act under pressure. Most people, he argues, are ungrateful and unreliable. They lie, they fake, they're greedy for cash, and they melt away in the face of danger. Friendship that's bought with promises or gifts is inherently unreliable because love binds when someone recognizes he should be grateful to you, but gratitude is forgotten the moment it's inconvenient. People are self-interested.
Whereas fear?
Fear is different. Fear means fear of punishment, and that's something people never forget. So fear, being tied to the tangible consequence of punishment, is a more constant, more reliable motivator than the fickle emotion of love or gratitude.
But there's a crucial caveat here, isn't there? Even if you choose fear, you absolutely must avoid hatred. That seems a critical detail for long-term survival.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Avoiding hatred is paramount. He states that a ruler must take care above all that people don't come to hate him. And how do you avoid hatred? He gives very specific details. Do not seize subjects' property or women.
That's it, property and women.
Those are the two main triggers for deep-seated unifying hatred in his view. He believes that most men are content otherwise. As long as you don't touch their material possessions or their family honor, they'll tolerate a lot. Avoid those two things, and you won't provoke the kind of widespread, unified hatred that leads to revolution.
To explore this tension further, Machiavelli dives into the Roman emperor's dilemma in chapter 19. They faced hatred from both the people and the army. A tough spot.
A really tough problem, yes. It was the downfall of many emperors because it was so hard to keep both happy. The people generally wanted a quiet life and hence loved low-profile leaders. But the soldiers craved military ambitions, men who were brazen, grasping, and cruel.
Why? So they could profit.
Exactly. The soldiers wanted the emperor to unleash those qualities on the people so they, the soldiers, could increase their own incomes and indulge their greed and violence. So emperors often felt forced to satisfy the army because the army held the immediate tangible power. It was a policy dictated by necessity if they couldn't avoid hatred altogether. They tried to escape the hatred of the classes that wield the most power, which was often the military. Machiavelli details several specific emperors to illustrate this dynamic.
He gives examples of success and failure. Let's start with Marcus Aurelius. He seems like the ideal, but maybe a rare case.
Marcus Aurelius inherited his position, possessed genuinely good qualities, and crucially managed to keep both the people and the army in their place throughout his reign. He was never either hated or despised and thus avoided a sad end. He's presented as the ideal, but Machiavelli implies this was a rare situation, partly due to Marcus inheriting his power and legitimacy, allowing him to bridge that gap.
Then there's Pertinax. His good intentions backfired.
Completely. Pertinax was made emperor against the army's wishes. He tried to impose honesty, discipline, but the army, which had grown accustomed to a degenerate lifestyle under the previous emperor, Commodus, hated this. He was also despised for being old. Result: soon overthrown. His downfall shows that even admirable intentions can be fatal if they clash with powerful, entrenched interests like a corrupt military.
What about Alexander Severus? He sounds like a good guy, a just ruler, but he still met a bad end. That seems odd.
It does, doesn't it? Alexander Severus was apparently a good man, praised for never executing anyone without trial in his 14 years. But the army despised him. Why? Because they saw him as effeminate and resented that he let his mother influence decisions. They saw it as weak leadership. So the army conspired and killed him.
So you can be hated for being good.
That's Machiavelli's chilling conclusion from this case. You can be hated just as much for the good you do as the bad, which implies a ruler is often forced not to be good, especially when dealing with powerful, corrupt groups like the army, whose interests clash with the public good or conventional virtue. The specific detail here is the reason for the hatred contempt for perceived weakness, even if the ruler was just.
But then we get Severus, a contrast. He took power rather than inheriting it, and succeeded through sheer ruthlessness and cunning. What was his specific detailed strategy?
Severus was a master of Machiavelli's fox and lion approach. First, the lion. He persuaded his army to march on Rome, supposedly just to avenge the murdered Pertinax, hiding his own ambition. He moved so fast he was already in Italy before anyone knew his real intentions. Once elected emperor, he faced two powerful rivals, Niger in Asia, Albinus in the West.
Too dangerous to fight both at once.
He decided it was. So now the fox. He chose to attack Niger first, while cleverly tricking Albinus. He wrote to Albinus, offered him the title of Caesar, co-emperor, pretending partnership. Albinus bought it. As soon as Severus had decisively defeated and killed Niger, he immediately turned on Albinus, complained to the Senate that Albinus had betrayed him, marched to France, stripped Albinus of power, and had him killed.
Wow. Ruthless efficiency.
Totally. Severus earned respect through terror and competence. He was ruthless, courageous, demanded discipline, didn't tolerate easy living. He terrified both the people and the soldiers into submission. Every detail of his rise screams strategic calculation and brutal execution.
And Antoninus Caracalla. His case highlights a very specific detail about how a ruler treats his inner circle.
Yes. Caracalla was killed by a centurion whom he had deeply personally wronged. He'd killed the centurion's brother in disgraceful circumstances, and then apparently threatened the centurion himself daily, yet, incredibly, kept the man in his personal bodyguard. Machiavelli uses this to warn that a ruler must not do a serious injustice to any of the men he has serving him or keeps beside him to run the state. Such rash behavior, such disregard for the consequences of personal slights, especially towards armed subordinates, can lead to disaster. It's a reminder that even the powerful can't afford carelessness in personal interactions. Every detail matters.
Maximinus, another emperor who met a bad end. What did his case illustrate?
Maximinus came from a lowly background, a Thracian shepherd, apparently, and was elected by the army after Alexander Severus. He was a real warmonger. But he quickly became universally despised for his low birth, hated and feared for his ferocity because he ordered numerous atrocities. He put off going to Rome for his official investiture, gaining a reputation for extreme cruelty from afar.
So a combination of contempt and hatred.
Exactly. He faced rebellions from Africa, the Senate, Rome itself, and finally his own army, fed up with his cruelty and realizing just how many enemies he'd made, became less afraid of the man and killed him. His downfall was a perfect storm of being despised for his background and hated for his actions.
So pulling back from these Roman examples, what's the modern relevance for rulers today? Does the army still hold that same kind of power over the people?
Machiavelli concludes that generally, contemporary rulers do not have to give the same priority to satisfying the army that the Roman emperors did. While armies obviously still need attention, the problem is soon resolved in most cases because modern armies, in his time, didn't wield the same kind of broad administrative and political power that Roman legions did in the provinces.
So the balance has shifted.
Yes. The critical detail is this. If the emperors had to put their armies before the people, it was because the armies were the more powerful. These days, it is more important for all rulers, with the exceptions of the Turkish and Egyptian sultans who rely on huge standing armies, to put the people before the army, because the people are more powerful. That's a profound shift in his analysis, recognizing the evolving source of ultimate power in society moving towards the populace.
So what are the overall lessons for new rulers from these different emperors' fates? It sounds like there's no single right way to imitate them.
Definitely not. He argues it was futile and dangerous for Pertinax and Alexander, the good but weak ones, to try and imitate Marcus Aurelius, who inherited his position and was naturally beloved. They came to power differently. Similarly, it was a fatal mistake for the cruel emperors like Caracalla, Commodus, and Maximinus to try and imitate the successful ruthlessness of Severus without possessing Severus's unique, formidable qualities.
So you have to choose the right model for the right situation.
Precisely. His advice is nuanced. A new monarch, establishing power, cannot imitate the likes of Marcus Aurelius, but should take Severus's policies for founding a state. Those decisive, sometimes brutal actions needed early on. But for achieving long-term stability and glory once the state is secure, he should look to Marcus's model. This highlights the need for adaptability, for choosing the right approach for the right stage of rule, a detailed evolutionary view of power.
Okay, let's tackle chapter 18, a ruler and his promises. This is another one of those famously Machiavellian concepts that a ruler's word isn't always binding. What's the paradox he sets up here?
He starts by acknowledging the ideal. It's admirable to keep his word and be honest. Everyone agrees that's praiseworthy. However, he immediately counters this with cold observation. In our own times, we've had examples of leaders who've done great things without worrying too much about keeping their word. Outwitting opponents with their cunning, these men achieved more than leaders who behaved honestly. That's the paradox. Honesty is good, but cunning often seems more effective in the real political arena.
And he uses the famous fox and lion analogy to explain the necessary duality.
Yes, the ruler needs to be both. A lion to recognize traps, fox to avoid them. The lion represents strength, force. The fox represents cunning, deception. A ruler needs both because, as Machiavelli puts it, there are two ways of fighting, one by argument, the other by force. The first is human, the second animal. And since the human way, reason, law, is often insufficient, a ruler must needs have recourse to the second, the animal way, combining force and fraud when necessary. It's a very detailed, almost biological view of political struggle.
So it all comes down to adaptability. A ruler can't be rigid. He has to be able to change his approach.
Absolutely fundamental. The successful ruler has a character that can change tack as luck and circumstances demand. He should ideally stick to the good if he can, but know how to be bad when the occasion demands. This flexibility, this ability to shift moral gears based on perceived necessity, is key to survival and success. It's not about being inherently evil, but about being pragmatically prepared to act outside conventional norms when the situation requires it. A crucial detail often missed in caricatures of him.
And crucially, it's not just about what you do, but about the art of appearance. What specific virtues must a ruler seem to have, regardless of reality?
A ruler must be extremely careful not to say anything that doesn't appear to be inspired by the 5 virtues. He lists them: compassionate, loyal, humane, honest, and wholly religious. Then he adds, with emphasis, there is nothing more important than appearing to be religious.
Wow. Appearing religious is the most important.
That's what he says. This detail is incredibly cynical, incredibly practical. It explicitly separates sincere belief from political utility. It's all about manipulating public perception, maintaining an image of virtue, especially piety, because that's what impresses the masses.
Which connects directly to public perception. How does Machiavelli think people judge their leaders? Superficially.
Very much so. He states that, in general, people judge more by appearances than firsthand experience. He explains, everyone sees what you seem to be. Few have experience of who you really are, and those few won't have the courage to stand up to majority opinion underwritten by the authority of state.
So the ends justify the means in the public eye.
Pretty much. People look at the end result.
I know.
So if a leader does what it takes to win power and keep it, his methods will always be reckoned honorable and widely praised. The crowd is won over by appearances and final results. As he puts it starkly, the world is all crowd. The dissenting few find no space so long as the majority have any grounds at all for their opinions. The details of popular judgment are shallow, focused on success and image.
He gives a pointed contemporary example of this strategic hypocrisy. Ferdinand of Aragon.
He alludes to a certain king today, which the translator identifies as Ferdinand of Aragon, who never stops preaching peace and trust, and is actually sworn enemy to both. And if he had ever practiced, either he would have lost his authority or his kingdom many times over. This specific real-world example underscores his point. Leaders who outwardly profess virtue while secretly practicing the opposite are often the most successful, provided they are masterful at maintaining the illusion. The detail is in the successful deception. #insexing, navigating internal and external threats.
Okay, so let's explore how a shrewd ruler navigates those constant dangers, both from within his state and from outside. Chapter 19 brings together a lot of his advice on avoiding contempt and hatred, which he sees as absolutely paramount for stability. What's his summary of key avoidances?
He basically reiterates the 2 big ones that lead directly to hatred.
Yeah.
Seizing and stealing his subjects' property and women. He's emphatic that he must not do. Avoid those, and he believes most men will be happy enough, leaving the ruler to mainly worry about the ambitions of a few nobles.
And contempt. What leads to that?
Contempt comes from being seen as changeable, superficial, effeminate, fearful, or indecisive. These qualities are poison to a ruler's reputation, stumbling blocks to be avoided at all costs because they fundamentally undermine authority and invite challenges.
So instead, a ruler needs to constantly be projecting an image of strength and reliability.
Absolutely. A ruler must actively project this impression of himself as embodying greatness, spirit, seriousness, and strength. He needs to make his decisions seem final, ensuring no one imagines they can trick or outwit him. This consistent projection of an unshakable, capable persona makes it hard to conspire against a man who is well thought of. It creates a powerful deterrent effect, both internally and externally. Enemies hesitate to attack someone with such a strong reputation.
He distinguishes between internal versus external dangers. What's the primary detailed defense against each, according to Machiavelli?
For external dangers, threats from other states, a ruler needs 2 things: a good army and good allies. And he notes, pragmatically, if you have a good army, you'll always have good allies. Good military strength attracts support. He believes security against foreign powers generally leads to internal security too, assuming there wasn't already a conspiracy underway.
And for internal dangers, like conspiracies?
The most powerful preventive measure is simply not being hated by a majority of the people. He argues conspiracies are inherently difficult. A conspirator can't act alone, needs accomplices who might betray him for personal gain, and faces immense personal risk. Experience shows that for every successful conspiracy, there are any number of failures. So keeping the people generally content is the best defense. The detail here is that dual focus: military strength externally, popular support internally.
He gives that very specific historical example, the Bentivogli example, to show how strong popular support can even overcome a successful assassination.
It's a really striking detail, yeah. Annibale Bentivogli, the Duke of Bologna, was successfully murdered by conspirators of the Canesci's family. But what happened next? Immediately after the murder, the people rose up and killed all the Canescis. Why? Because the Bentivogli family was extremely popular at the time.
So popular they even imported a relative.
Exactly. The Bolognese realized no immediate family members were capable of ruling, so he went all the way to Florence to find a man who was supposedly a Bentivogli relative, though he had been living as a blacksmith's son, and asked him to govern until the legitimate baby heir, Giovanni, was old enough. It's an incredible story demonstrating how deep-seated popular loyalty, meticulously cultivated, can be the ultimate fortress, even thwarting a successful coup attempt.
Okay, chapter 20 discusses fortresses and other strategies rulers often use. What are some common ones he looks at?
He lists several common tactics. Disarming their citizens, keeping subject towns divided in factions, which he generally thinks is a bad idea as it weakens the state overall, encouraging hostility towards themselves, definitely doesn't endorse that, winning over those who were initially suspicious, and the big one, building destroying fortresses. He cautions you can't judge these without knowing the specific context, the detailed circumstances of the state, but he offers general guidelines.
Regarding arming versus disarming subjects, his advice seems nuanced depending on the type of state. What are the precise details?
Yes, it depends. If it's a new state ruler, someone just taking power, he advises to always arm subjects. History offers endless examples. This builds loyalty, creates a national fighting force invested in the ruler. However,
But if it's territory added to an existing state,
right, when a ruler acquires a new territory to add like an extra limb to an existing state, then he must disarm its people. Except maybe for the locals who actively supported him during the conquest. And even those supporters should eventually be kept weak and emasculated. Why? So that all the real armed force in the state as a whole resides with your own soldiers who live with you in your home base. It's a careful, detailed strategy to ensure ultimate military power remains centralized and loyal, preventing regional power bases from forming.
what about fortresses? Useful or not? It sounds like context is key.
Very much so. Their utility will depend on the circumstances. He gives examples of rulers like Niccolò Machiavelli in Città di Castello, Guidobaldo in Urbino, the Bentivogli family in Bologna, who actually demolished or razed every fortress in their territory. They believed doing so made them less likely to lose control to internal factions or invaders who might seize the forts.
So what is the best fortress?
For Machiavelli, ultimately, your best fortress is not to be hated by the people. He warns bluntly that fortresses won't save you if people hate you, because if the people are hostile, they will simply find foreign support and invite invaders who will help them overthrow you. Force can't stop that.
But he gives that one exception, Caterina Sforza, where a fortress did help initially.
Yes, the Countess of Forli. Her fortress saved her right after her husband was murdered. It allowed her to hold out against the rebels long enough for help to arrive from Milan. But, and this is the crucial second part, Machiavelli notes that later her fortresses were not much use when Cesare Borgia attacked the town, and the people who were hostile to her fought on his side.
So the people's hostility ultimately trumped the stone walls.
Exactly. He concludes that both then and earlier, she would have been safer had she avoided making an enemy of the people, rather than counting on fortresses. His overall stance is pragmatic. He approves both building and not building fortresses, depending on the situation. But he always criticizes any ruler who imagines it doesn't matter whether the people hate him or not and trusts in fortresses for his security. The detailed analysis shows his flexibility, but always with that underlying emphasis on popular support as the true foundation.
Moving to chapter 21, winning respect. What are the main ways a ruler achieves this, according to Machiavelli's detailed observations? What earns respect?
He states it very clearly. Nothing wins a ruler respect like great military victories and a display of remarkable personal qualities. He then uses Ferdinand of Aragon, the King of Spain at the time, as a prime example of a ruler new to power, who became most famous and honored of Christendom. Ferdinand's rise, for Machiavelli, was a masterclass in calculated action and image management.
What specific details of Ferdinand's actions does Machiavelli highlight as exemplary?
First, his Granada invasion. He launched it at a moment of domestic quiet, which cleverly kept the powerful Castilian barons busy fighting Muslims instead of plotting against him. This long war allowed him to increase his own power, build a strong army funded by the church and the people, and gain immense reputation.
And the expulsion of the Jews.
Yes, he famously perpetrated what Machiavelli calls an act of cruelty dressed up as piety by stripping the Murano Jews, converts from Judaism, of their wealth and expelling them. Machiavelli describes this as distressing or striking, acknowledging its brutality but recognizing its political effectiveness in consolidating power and appealing to religious fervor. Then, under cover of religion, Ferdinand continuously launched campaigns attacking Africa, then Italy, then France. Machiavelli emphasizes, so he was always undertaking great enterprises, keeping his subjects impressed, busy, and focused on his external actions. This detailed account shows a ruler meticulously crafting his image through constant, aggressive activity, projecting strength and piety.
Another key piece of advice for winning respect, and one that really cuts against traditional diplomacy, is being a true friend or enemy, never staying neutral. What are the detailed consequences of neutrality in Machiavelli's view?
This is a really stark warning from him. If two powerful neighbors go to war and you try to stay neutral, Machiavelli says you'll be gobbled up by the winner to the amusement and satisfaction of the loser. You'll have no excuses, no defense, and nowhere to hide.
Why? Don't winners appreciate neutrality?
Not according to Machiavelli. The winner doesn't want half-hearted friends who don't help him in a crisis.
Yeah.
And the loser repudiates you because you didn't stand with them in their time of need. He cites the story of Antiochus asking the Achaeans, allied with Rome, to stay neutral. The Roman ambassador bluntly retorted, "Nothing could be more damaging to your interests. You'll get no thanks, no consideration, and will be taken as a reward by whoever wins." The detailed outcomes of trying to play it safe are all negative.
So clearly there are significant benefits of taking sides.
Definitely. If your chosen ally wins, Machiavelli argues, he'll be indebted to you and there'll be a bond of friendship. Even if they become much more powerful, they generally won't be shameless enough to turn on you immediately. And if your ally loses, well, you're still their friend. You become companions in misfortune, and there's always the possibility that your luck could always turn, and you might rise together later.
But there's a catch, right? A caution with powerful allies.
Yes, a very important one. A ruler must never ally himself with someone more powerful in order to attack his enemies, unless it is absolutely necessary. Why? Because when you win, you'll be at your allies' mercy. He cites the Venetians' alliance with France against Milan as an alliance they could have avoided, and it led to disaster. The only exception is when it's truly unavoidable, like Florence being forced by circumstance to ally with the Pope in Spain against Lombardy. He concludes this section with a fundamental maxim. A ruler must never imagine that any decision he takes is safe. Every choice involves risk, and the specific details of that risk must be carefully weighed.
Finally, Chapter 22 offers detailed advice on choosing ministers. How does the quality of a ruler's ministers reflect back on the ruler himself?
It's a direct reflection, Machiavelli says. The quality of ministers will reflect his good sense or lack of it and give people their first impression of the way the ruler's mind is working. If ministers are capable and loyal, people will always reckon a ruler astute because he was able to recognize their ability and command their loyalty. But if they're incompetent or disloyal, it's seen immediately as the ruler's first mistake. He uses the example of Pandolfo Petrucci choosing Antonio da Venafro as his minister, which made Pandolfo himself seem extremely smart just by that wise appointment. The detail of who you choose speaks volumes.
He then classifies 3 kinds of minds, which relates to how effective someone can be as a leader or a minister.
Yes, it's a simple but insightful classification. The best mind grasps things unaided. The genuinely brilliant, innovative thinkers, extremely valuable. The second kind sees what another has grasped. Those who are smart enough to understand and implement good ideas presented by others, also valuable. And the third kind grasps nothing and sees nothing, completely useless in a position of responsibility.
So the ruler doesn't have to be a genius himself.
Not necessarily. Machiavelli acknowledges that even if a ruler only has the second kind of mind, he can still succeed, provided he's sharp enough to recognize what's right and wrong in his minister's actions and advice. This allows the ruler to encourage the good ones and correct the bad. Crucially, this discernment means the minister will realize that he can't fool the ruler and so will have to behave. This detailed classification shows Machiavelli doesn't demand innate genius in a ruler, but rather shrewd judgment in choosing and managing capable people. That's a skill in itself. #Tag7. Enduring lessons in the dance with fortune.
All right, so we've meticulously dissected the acquisition, the governance, the military needs, the character traits of a Machiavellian ruler. Now let's turn to the broader enduring lessons and that famous, often debated idea of the dance with fortune. Chapter 24 gets right into it. Why Italian rulers lost their states. What's his blunt assessment?
He attributes their downfall to a combination of specific identifiable failings. First, as we've discussed extensively, they all had poor armies, mainly due to that disastrous reliance on mercenaries. Second, some of them had the people against them, or even if they had popular support initially, they couldn't keep the nobles on their side. He stresses that without these failings, you don't lose a state that's strong enough to field an army.
He gives an example of someone who didn't fail.
Yes, Philip of Macedonia, not Alexander the Great's father, but the later one beaten by the Romans. Despite having fewer resources than his enemies, Philip was a military man who skillfully knew how to please the people and keep the nobles on his side. Because of this, he held out for years and kept his kingdom intact for a long time. The detail isn't avoiding those specific, actionable weaknesses. Bad army, alienated people, uncontrolled nobles.
So it wasn't just bad luck that brought these Italian rulers down. It was self-blame, not bad luck.
Absolutely. Machiavelli tells them, essentially, spare us their bad luck stories. They have only themselves to blame. He points out a common shortcoming, that in peacetime they never imagined anything could change. They failed to prepare for the storm while the weather is fair. Exactly. So when trouble did strike, their first thought was to run for it rather than defend themselves. They hoped that people would get angry at the invaders and call them back. Machiavelli calls this hope a serious failing, warning that a ruler should never be resigned to falling from power because he's counting on finding someone to prop him up again afterwards. That strategy is spineless and involved relying on others. The ultimate indictment is their failure to meticulously prepare to build their own strength.
So what is the only true lasting defense, according to Machiavelli?
It comes back to his core theme. The only good, sure, lasting forms of defense are those based on yourself and your own strength. Self-reliance. Military self-sufficiency combined with the detailed, careful management of internal loyalties, people and nobles. There are no shortcuts, no external saviors you can count on. Only your own foresight and capacity for decisive action matter in the end.
This leads perfectly into chapter 25, maybe one of the most philosophical parts, discussing the role of luck in human affairs and how to defend against it. He acknowledges the common belief that everything's run by God and by fortune.
He does. He admits that many people have believed and still do believe that the world is run by God and by fortune, which can make human efforts seem pointless. He even confesses that sometimes, thinking it over, I have leaned a bit that way myself, especially given the huge changes we've witnessed in his own chaotic times. But, being Machiavelli, the pragmatist...
He can't just leave it at that.
No. He immediately seeks to define the limits of fortune's power, to find where human will, human virtue, can still make a difference.
And he uses that vivid analogy of fortune as a flooding river.
Yes, it's a great image.
Yeah.
He describes fortune like a raging river that shows its power where no one has taken steps to contain it, flooding into places where it finds neither banks nor dikes that can hold it back.
Yeah.
He then applies this directly to Italy, calling it a land that has neither banks nor dikes to protect it.
Lacking the necessary preparations.
Exactly. He contrasts Italy with Germany, Spain, and France, which he says were properly protected, with stronger institutions, better armies, the equivalent of banks and dikes. If Italy had been similarly prepared, he argues, the flood wouldn't have had such drastic effects or wouldn't have happened at all. This emphasizes that while fortune, external events, luck, is incredibly powerful, human agency, through detailed preparation and foresight, virtue, can significantly mitigate its destructive impact. Preparation is the dike against the flood.
So despite fortune's power, Machiavelli still believes in human agency, in our ability to shape events. It's not all predetermined.
Definitely not entirely. His conviction is that the successful ruler is the one who adapts to changing times, while the leader who fails does so because his approach is out of step with circumstances. This idea of conflicting approaches is key. People pursue success in different ways. Some are cautious, some impulsive, some use violence, others finesse or patience. Success isn't inherent in the approach itself. It depends entirely on whether that specific approach suits the circumstances of the moment.
So the same approach could work one time and fail another.
Precisely. Two men using the same approach might get different results. Two men using different approaches might both succeed. It all depends on the detailed alignment between their methods and the specific nature of the times. It's a dynamic dance, not a fixed formula.
But adapting, changing your fundamental approach, seems incredibly difficult for people. Why can't a ruler just switch tactics when needed?
It is incredibly difficult. He notes insightfully that you won't find anyone shrewd enough to adapt his character like this. Why not? Partly due to natural bias, we all have ingrained tendencies, we're creatures of habit, and partly because if a person has always been successful with a particular approach, he won't easily be persuaded to drop it. Success reinforces behavior.
So when times change,
When circumstances shift, that previously successful, cautious man might be unable to act impulsively when impulsiveness is required, leading to his downfall. Machiavelli suggested if a ruler could change his nature to match the times, his luck would hold steady. But the specific details of human psychological rigidity often prevent this perfect adaptation.
he uses Pope Julius II as a detailed example of an impulsive success, someone whose nature just happened to fit the times perfectly.
Exactly. Pope Julius II always acted impulsively and lived in times and circumstances so well suited to this approach that things always went well for him. Machiavelli details his capture of Bologna. Despite opposition from Venice and Spain, despite ongoing talks with the French, Julius, with his usual ferocity and impetuousness, just led the expedition himself without waiting for anyone.
Bold move.
Incredibly bold. This audacity, this willingness to act on impulse and risk everything, put his opponents in a quandary, forced their hand, and allowed him to succeed where a more cautious diplomatic approach likely would have failed. His natural inclination just happened to be exactly what those turbulent times demanded. Fortune favored his specific brand of boldness.
And then we come back to that very explicit, very controversial closing statement on fortune from the main text. Fortune is female.
Yes, he concludes the body of the prince with this famously provocative, deeply unsettling metaphor. My opinion on the matter is this. It's better to be impulsive than cautious. Fortune is female, and if you want to stay on top of her, you have to slap and thrust.
Slap and thrust.
He believes she's more likely to yield that way than to men who go about her coldly. And being a woman, she likes her men young because they're not so cagey, they're wilder and more daring when they master her. This raw, direct, sexually charged metaphor epitomizes his view of the dynamic, almost violent relationship a ruler must have with unpredictable circumstances to truly dominate them, to impose his will. It's a very visceral, aggressive detail, stripping away any pretense of gentle persuasion.
And finally, in chapter 26, the tone shifts dramatically. Machiavelli makes this passionate appeal to conquer Italy. He sees the moment as right, propitious for a new ruler, despite Italy's terrible state.
He paints a truly grim, detailed picture first. Italy is more slave than the Jews, more crushed than the Persians, more divided than the Athenians, leaderless, lawless, beaten, plundered, broken, and overrun, ruined in every way. Utter desolation. Yet paradoxically, in this very ruin, he sees a unique opportunity. A time is ripe for a new ruler.
The raw material is there.
That's his argument. He says explicitly that Italy is hardly lacking in raw material for the man who wants to give form to it. The limbs are healthy and strong. All they need is a head to guide them. The potential, the detailed ingredients for revival exist. What's missing is the leadership, the virtue.
So the Italian potential is there, but what's holding them back? Why can't they unite?
The problem, he says, is fundamentally one of leadership, or lack thereof. Italians are strong individually. He notes their skill in duels or small skirmishes. They show courage and ability one-on-one, but they can't compete as unified armies because they are badly led. This detailed failure at the top is why, he argues, in all these wars over the past 20 years, whenever an army has been entirely made up of Italians, it has always failed miserably. He cites specific humiliating battles like Taro, Alessandria, Vaila as proof. It's a precise diagnosis of a national military weakness rooted in poor command.
But he does offer some hope, suggesting new tactics and reputation that a new leader could use.
He does. He points out the specific weak points of the dominant Swiss and Spanish infantries of the day. He knows how Spanish infantry learned to get under the German pikes with agility and small shields, allowing them to strike at will. He believes it's quite possible to train a new army, using perhaps different tactics tailored to Italian strengths, that could hold back a cavalry attack and wouldn't be unsettled by infantry combat. Tactical innovation is possible.
And this would bring prestige.
Yes, these are the kinds of developments that enhance a new ruler's reputation and bring him great prestige. It's a concrete military detail offering a path to glory for the right leader.
And he closes the whole book with that powerful call to virtue, a kind of patriotic plea.
He does. He ends with those stirring lines from Petrarch. Virtue against fury shall take up arms, and the fight be short. For ancient valor is not dead in Italian hearts. It's a powerful, nationalistic, almost messianic conclusion. It contrasts quite sharply with the cold, pragmatic calculations that fill most of the book, appealing suddenly to a higher sense of purpose, a patriotic destiny for all the detailed, often brutal advice he's just given.
Wow, what a journey that was. We've taken a truly fascinating and, yeah, sometimes deeply unsettling deep dive into Machiavelli's The Prince. We've really tried to understand his unflinching realism about power, the incredibly practical, often ruthless advice he offered, and that tumultuous historical context that demanded such a precise, detailed guide.
We really have. And we've seen how even the smallest details of history, of military strategy, of human psychology could, in his view, dictate the fate of nations and rulers. Machiavelli wasn't offering comforting fantasies or simple moral lessons. He provided stark, detailed observations on what people do, particularly in the political arena, not just what they ought to do. Always focused on the tangible outcomes, the practical realities.
So, considering Machiavelli's insistence on the need for a ruler to be both that fox and the lion, and maybe to prioritize outcomes over conventional morality, what does this detailed examination of power tell us about the leaders we choose and the world we still live in today? Does that real truth of the matter, as he called it, still demand that a leader learn how to stop being good when the occasion demands? Or has society truly evolved beyond needing those kinds of stark necessities?
That's the enduring question, isn't it? Does that perceived necessity for a ruler sometimes to act outside the moral codes that applied to ordinary individuals still hold true? Or are we, maybe in our modern sensibilities, truly past that kind of primal dance with power, the kind driven by the meticulous, sometimes cold, calculation of human behavior and political necessity? It's something to think about.
It really is. Share your thoughts with us on that profound question. Until next time, keep digging for those nuggets of insight.